Debora Cahn, you created the political drama The Diplomat about Kate Weiler, who becomes U.S. ambassador to the United Kingdom. Now, ambassadors is not the kind of role we usually see in political stories like this. What was the inspiration for creating Kate?
So when I was writing for Homeland, we had um, an incredible parade of experts who would come in and talk to us from the intelligence world and political world and journalists. And uh, we had an ambassador come in, a woman named Beth Jones, and she looked a little bit like a librarian or like a very kindly grandma. And then she started talking about what she did in her career and on an average day as well. She's been an ambassador in many different countries. She's been assistant secretary of state for Europe uh, and the Near East. And she was like, they were superhero stories that she was telling. Like, it was just crazy swings from like having to be in somebody's palace and complimenting the China to dodging bombs so that you could pin down a warlord and negotiate some sort of ceasefire. And it really felt like stories that I hadn't heard before. And it just seemed made for TV. And I had always wanted to set a show in a kind of a geopolitical foreign policy world. I felt like a lot of the stories that get told about that are, us good, them bad. And I feel like, there's no us in the foreign, like we're our 2000 different opinions in a room of 500 people. And I wanted to represent a little bit of that, and as much as possible, the same thing on another side or on another, the kind of the combinations and permutations of relationships that you have when you've got two countries, you add a third country, it just gets exponentially more complicated and intractable. And I think it's kind of, I always felt like it was easy to tell stories about us being the good guys and somebody else being the bad guys. But if we assume that everybody goes into this for good reasons, if we assume that, that not all politicians are corrupt and venal, if they're trying to do their best, and if other people in other countries are trying to do their best, and we are still in the shit show that we're in, like that's interesting. And in a lot of ways, a little bit more depressing, because this is the product of good people trying and still failing. But it feels to me like a more compelling thing to look at.
And in your career, you've worked on West Wing, Homeland, as you mentioned. Have you always been interested in politics, or has the work you've done sort of introduced you to it and given you that interest?
When I first interviewed with Aaron Sorkin to get a job on the West Wing, um, I looked up how a bill becomes a law, and I watched the Schoolhouse Rock explanation of it. I didn't know anything about politics. I had been an intern on Capitol Hill for a short period of time, and I knew a little bit about one congressman and one area that I focused on, but the learning curve was astronomical and absolutely terrifying. And but once but once I had made that curve and realized that there was something useful about my coming from a position of ignorance and having to learn about a field and talking to people who really knew about it, that became the fun part, like going into a field I know nothing about and then trying to get my head around it and find a way to tell a story that is compelling and at least somewhat truthful to the people who actually work in those worlds. Although that's not ultimately the goal. It's, how do you take that back and tell a story that's interesting and entertaining and also compelling for people who don't know that world?
And one of the interesting things about the show is it's dealing with serious, tense subject matter, intense international relations. But there's also a lot of humor to it and a lot of levity at times, dealing with the character of Kate and her sort of fish out of water situation and her marriage. What was it like keeping that balance of the seriousness of her job with kind of balances of light and dark?
It was hard. It was hard all the way through, and it continues to be hard. And at every step, we're kind of rejiggering that balance of, what bits stay in and what stay out. What, if we add music to this, is it going to make it feel too light? Is it going to make it feel too melodramatic? It was, what was exciting to me about the challenge is kind of the mix of genres and trying to kind of bring to life what feels honest to me, which is like you can be a head of state, you can be in a beautiful place, but you're still somebody who like thinks maybe they have gum on the bottom of their shoe, and you can't figure out like when you're going to be able to check to see if there's gum on the bottom of your shoe. Like those moments don't go away for those people in those environments. And that to me is what I just find endlessly interesting and engaging and embarrassing, and trying to figure out how people who we in a certain way deify deal with their own like horrific humanity.
And the plot that the story is dealing with is an attack on a British vessel. How did you, and the involvement of Iran and Russia and who did what? How did you decide on sort of this plot and this international intrigue to get Kate Weiler involved in?
Well, I talked to a lot of ambassadors and a lot of foreign policy people and a lot of intelligence people, and the first question is always the same, which is like, what's keeping you up at night that I don't know about yet, and you know about, and you're kind of terrified that the rest of us don't know about. So listening to those scenarios, some of them are a misunderstanding in the Persian Gulf, like what happens in the Straits of Hormuz when a small thing is misinterpreted and then becomes a massive thing. So that I thought was really interesting. I also I wanted a story that was going to kind of take us through almost a whodunit of first we wonder if it's an accident, then we realize it was some sort of foul play, and we immediately sort of go to our Islamophobic go-to move of it must be Iran, and we're prepared to act on that. And fairly quickly it becomes clear that that's not the case. I mean, when you write about foreign policy, in the last 10 years, you've sort of had your fill of Islamophobic generated villains. And so I wanted to kind of play into that and immediately make it clear that whoever the perpetrators were trying to play on that sentiment. And then, there was something about the fact that it was in the UK that there was a sort of a satisfying, like there's a whodunit and you go through like, Miss Marple, we think it's this person, it's not, we think it's that country, it's not, we think it's that country, it's not, and then we think the call's coming from inside the house. So yeah.
And the show leaves us on a cliffhanger in season one. How far ahead do you have plans for the Diplomat? Do you have it just what will happen season two, or do you have like a 5-year plan, or what are you kind of cooking up?
I most of my career I have come in a couple seasons into what has become a very long running show, And that was in the days of network television when a long running show did 22 or 25 episodes a year. So I always am looking to find myself in a world where the story can keep going and split off in any number of ways. Homeland was an amazing model in that way. The story shifted from country to country and from environment to environment, and the lead had a series of jobs in different fields, and that has always sort of been the gold standard for me, for putting yourself in a world where there's going to be endless story, and you're not gonna you're not running out of material at any time. So I don't know, it's fun. I want to keep doing it.
Well, congratulations on your work on the show, and thank you very much for talking with me about it.
Thank you. Good to talk to you.